What if the most powerful thing you'll ever say to her is nothing at all? No explanations, no long messages, no late-night calls trying to make her understand. Just stillness, just space. And in that space, something begins to shift. Not in you, but in her. While most men rush to fix what's broken, you do the one thing she never saw coming. You stay silent. You hold your ground. No chasing, no pleading. Just presence, unshaken. And that silence, it begins to unravel her certainty. Not because you vanished, but because you stopped needing to be heard. This isn't revenge. It's not manipulation. It's reclamation of your energy, your focus, your peace. It's about becoming the kind of man whose absence echoes louder than any word could. In today's video, we'll uncover why your stillness shifts the power and how the moment you stop explaining is the moment she starts truly listening. If this speaks to something real in you, like the videos, subscribe to Stoic Station and let's dive in. 1. You said nothing. Now her mind says everything. There's a kind of silence that doesn't bring peace. It brings pressure. It doesn't feel like closure. It feels like an unanswered question that gets louder with time. And when you pulled back, when you chose not to explain, not to clarify, not to reach out, you left her with nothing but her own mind. That's where everything changed. Because when a man goes silent, a woman's imagination doesn't go quiet with him. It ignites. And that imagination, it's not kind. It doesn't give her comfort. It crafts a story far more painful than anything you could have said out loud. Her thoughts spiral into worst-case scenarios. Maybe you've already moved on. Maybe you never cared in the first place. Maybe you're finally giving someone else what she used to have without having to earn it. When you were still speaking, she could shape the story. She could soften it, spin it, tell herself she was still in control. He's emotional. He's just hurt. He'll come back. But now there's nothing to work with. No reply, no reaction, no reassurance, just space. And that space is the one thing her ego was never prepared to face. Because here's the truth, her ego can handle your anger. It can handle your tears, your confusion, even your pleading, because those emotions still orbit around her. But mystery, uncertainty, the feeling that you've slipped beyond her reach without warning, that's what unravels her. The moment you stopped explaining, she lost the script. She lost the certainty. And when a woman can no longer predict your next move, she becomes obsessed with it. Not out of love, but out of fear. Fear that she miscalculated. Fear that she meant less to you than you ever meant to her. Fear that this silence isn't temporary, it's your new truth. What she once took for granted is now a question mark she can't escape. And that's the beauty of it. Not in causing her pain, but in reclaiming your peace. You didn't need to shout. You didn't need to prove anything. You just pulled back, and the silence said what your words never could. That's when she started thinking, not casually, not once in a while, but deeply, obsessively. Because it's not just that you're gone, it's that she doesn't know why. And in the absence of answers, her own mind becomes the storm. And that is what breaks control, not confrontation, but the quiet power of a man who no longer needs to be understood. 2. You didn't flinch. Now she questions everything. When the storm hit, you didn't panic. You didn't chase. You didn't send long, emotional messages trying to explain yourself or salvage what was already unraveling. You just stood still, calm, unmoved. And that stillness, more than anything you could have said, shook her. Because most men, when faced with emotional chaos, react. They try to fix it. They plead. They offer one last gesture, one more conversation, hoping that maybe, just maybe, it'll bring her back. But you didn't do any of that. You didn't beg for closure or ask for another chance. You simply refused to break. And that refusal said more than desperation ever could. You didn't flinch when she pulled away. You didn't argue when she created distance. You let her make her choices, and you made yours in silence. What she expected was emotion. What she got was presence, a presence that didn't need to perform to be felt, a presence that didn't rise and fall based on her validation. And that's when the shift happened, not just in you, but in her. Because when a woman pushes and nothing shakes, when she expects a reaction and all she gets is calm, she starts to question the story she's told herself. That she held the power, that she had the emotional upper hand, that you'd fold without her. But now, she's not so sure. Now, instead of feeling adored, she feels something else, exposed. Not because you attacked her, not because you shut her out, but because you stayed rooted in your peace. And that kind of peace? It's unfamiliar to someone used to pulling emotional strings. She realizes you're not the same man she thought she could walk away from without consequence. You're not reacting because you're not dependent. You're not chasing because you know your worth. And that realization hits deeper than any words ever could. It forces her to face a truth she wasn't ready for. She's no longer dealing with a boy who needs her approval. She's standing in the presence of a man who doesn't. And that presence, strong, silent, unshaken, isn't something she can control. It's something she has to reckon with. And once she does, everything she thought she knew begins to fall apart. 3. You didn't close the door. You let it lock itself. You didn't announce you were done. You didn't make a scene or leave a dramatic message behind. You didn't try to make her feel the weight of your absence. You simply stepped away and stayed gone. And in doing that, something powerful happened. The door didn't slam. It simply stopped opening. She may not have noticed it at first. Maybe she thought you were just giving her space. Maybe she assumed you'd circle back, like you always did, because part of her believed you couldn't really leave without needing her to notice. But this time, something felt different. It wasn't anger. It wasn't withdrawal for attention. It was stillness, quiet, complete. You didn't burn the bridge. You just stopped walking toward it. And now she's left standing on the other side, realizing the connection she thought would always be there has gone cold. Not because you wanted to hurt her, but because you were finally done offering warmth where it wasn't valued. There were no ultimatums, no passive-aggressive exits, no last chances whispered into her silence. Just the quiet understanding that this isn't a break, it's a boundary, that this isn't a pause, it's peace. You didn't shut the door on her. Life did. And when she finally reaches for it, what she finds is not resistance, but stillness. A stillness that says she's no longer welcome, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. And that's what lingers, not the fight, not the goodbye, but the undeniable feeling that the man who once waited no longer waits, that the space she used to occupy has sealed itself without a sound, because the absence that doesn't chase is the one that haunts. It doesn't scream for attention. It doesn't beg to be reopened. It just exists, quiet, permanent, and real. And in that silence she realizes the truth. She wasn't pushed out. She was let go. And now the door she thought would always be unlocked has closed itself, not with force, but with finality. And that quiet kind of closure, that's the one that stays. 4. You leveled up in silence, and she heard it loud. You didn't post about your comeback. You didn't drop subtle hints online. You didn't throw your healing in her face. You just got quiet and got to work. While she expected you to spiral, to stay stuck in the place she left you, you chose something different. You chose to rebuild, not for her attention, but for your own evolution. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making her watch. It was about finally turning inward, stripping away everything that distracted you from your own direction. You didn't need an audience. You needed alignment. So you hit the gym, not for the mirror, but for the mindset. You fixed your posture, your sleep, your discipline, not to prove a point to her, but to prove something deeper to yourself. That her leaving wasn't the end of you. It was the beginning of who you were always meant to become. You redirected all the energy you once gave away so freely and poured it back into your purpose. The business you put off? You built it. The habits you neglected? You owned them. The man you lost touch with? You brought him back, stronger, clearer, quieter. You planted seeds, not for attention, but for legacy. And then one day, when she wasn't expecting it, the silence spoke. Through a mutual friend, through a changed photo, through a passing moment of curiosity. Somehow, some way, she saw it, and it hit her, not just what she lost, but who you became because of it. Not because you rubbed it in, but because she realized she no longer had access to the man she once underestimated. She's not haunted by the version of you she walked away from. She's haunted by the version you became after she did. Because now that man, the focused, grounded, self-led version, doesn't need her to notice. He's already moved far beyond the point of needing to be seen. And that's what stings the most. Not that you became better, but that she'll never get close enough to feel it. Because your evolution wasn't loud, but it echoed. And she heard it. Too late. 5. You took back your attention. Now she feels invisible. There was a time when your presence lingered, even after things fell apart. You didn't say much, but you watched her stories. You replied to the occasional post. You stayed in the background, not fully gone, but not fully present either. And whether you realized it or not, that subtle attention was feeding her more than your words ever did. It told her she still had space in your mind. It reassured her that she hadn't fully lost you. It gave her the comfort of knowing that, in some small way, she still mattered. But then something shifted. You saw it clearly for the first time. Every glance you gave her, every breadcrumb of energy you offered, wasn't helping you heal. It was helping her feel powerful. And the man who feeds a woman's ego while starving his own dignity doesn't just lose her, he loses himself. So you stopped, quietly, intentionally. You didn't block her. You didn't lash out. You simply pulled your energy back to where it belonged. She still posts, hoping you'll look, but you don't. She leaves doors cracked, hoping you'll walk through them, but you don't. You no longer orbit her world because you're too focused on rebuilding your own. And in that silence, something far more powerful than anger begins to take root: indifference. You're not trying to punish her. You're not trying to get even. You've simply lost the desire to engage. And that absence? It's not just distance, it's erasure. It's the slow realization on her end that the attention she once counted on has evaporated, that the man who used to respond instantly is now unreachable, that the presence she used to take for granted is no longer hers to feel. She doesn't know where your attention is going now, but she knows one thing for sure: it's not going to her. And that silence, steady, grounded, absolute, is louder than any confrontation ever could be. Because sometimes the loudest goodbye isn't a shout. It's the sound of nothing at all. And when that nothing becomes consistent, it becomes undeniable. That's when she starts to feel it. Not just the absence of your words, but the absence of your energy. That's when she realizes she's no longer seen. And for someone who once thrived on your attention, there's no feeling more painful than becoming invisible to the one who used to look at her like she mattered. 6. You sat in the silence, and she couldn't handle it. There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from confusion. It comes from clarity, A silence that doesn't beg to be filled because it already says everything. That's the silence you chose, not because you had nothing to say, but because you finally understood that not everything deserves your voice. And in doing so, you became something she didn't know how to respond to. Stillness isn't weakness. It isn't avoidance. It's control. It's choosing not to react when every part of you once would have. And for a woman who's used to being chased, to being able to spark emotion with a glance or a text, that stillness becomes unbearable. She pokes at it. She tries to stir the water. She looks for cracks, but nothing moves. And that's what makes her uneasy. You didn't disappear to make a point. You didn't play games. You just stopped contributing to the noise. And in the absence of your reaction, she's left alone with her own. She doesn't hear your explanations anymore. She hears her doubts, her regrets, her what-ifs. You used to be predictable, reachable, responsive, but now she doesn't know what you're thinking, where you are, or how close she is to losing you completely. And that mystery, that calm, immovable energy, it becomes a pressure she never expected to feel. Because silence, when held by a man who knows his worth, turns into a mirror. And she can't control what it reflects back at her. It doesn't shout. It doesn't argue. It doesn't need validation. It simply exists, present, strong, still. The longer you remain quiet, the more she feels the space you once filled. And what she mistook as distance becomes something deeper, detachment. And detachment isn't cold, it's final. Because when a man chooses stillness not out of fear but out of strength, it's no longer a pause, it's a decision. You didn't sit in silence because you had nothing left to give. You sat in it because you finally realized you were giving too much to someone who never learned how to value it. And now, in the silence she can't fill, she feels everything you no longer need to say. 7. You became the ending without needing one. There comes a point when you stop searching for the explanation, when you stop hoping that one more conversation will finally make the pain make sense. You reach that place not because you've stopped caring, but because you've finally accepted the truth. Closure isn't something she can give you. It's something you create the moment you stop needing anything from her. You didn't demand answers. You didn't ask her to explain herself. You didn't wait for the apology that was never coming. You simply let go, not with a dramatic goodbye, but with quiet certainty. No more, let's talk. No more, I just need to know. You stopped asking for clarity and chose peace instead. And that choice, that quiet surrender of expectation, did what words never could. It became the ending. Not the kind that's written together, not the one she expected or felt in control of, but the kind that closes itself when no one is looking. You didn't slam the door, you didn't lock it behind you, you just stopped standing in it. She expected an echo, maybe even a fight, but what she got was emptiness, not because you were cold, but because you were done. And now she's left with the weight of everything unsaid. The questions she thought she'd always be able to answer in her own time are now turning into ghosts that follow her. She doesn't replay the last thing you said. She replays the silence that came after it. Because the man who walks away without needing closure becomes something else entirely. He becomes the unfinished sentence, the chapter without a final page, the one who didn't just leave, but left her with no way back in. And that kind of absence doesn't fade. It lingers, not out of bitterness, but because it was clean, because it was calm, because it was real. You didn't end it by force. You ended it by no longer needing her to understand. And in doing so, you became the one part of the story she can't rewrite, not because you disappeared, but because you finally arrived at peace without her. If you're waiting for closure, for that one final conversation to make it all make sense, stop. That need, it keeps you trapped in her story, instead of writing your own. The real power, It's not in what you say, it's in what you withhold. When you go silent, you flip the dynamic. She no longer gets to define the ending, you do. And the moment you stop explaining yourself, her imagination starts working against her. That's when control shifts. The strength here? It's in stillness, not reacting, not reaching, not proving anything. Because a man who stands calm in uncertainty becomes unpredictable. And unpredictability? That's what breaks emotional control. Your strategy now is simple. Hold your line. Disengage with dignity. Focus on growth so silently it becomes deafening. You don't owe her clarity. You owe yourself peace. Let her sit in the space you used to fill, and let her realize she'll never be able to access the man you're becoming. If this spoke to something real in you, like the video, subscribe to Stoic Station. And remember this: your strength isn't in what you chase, it's in what you choose to release.